The screen fades in, not with light, but with silence. A faint hum of a refrigerator, a clock ticking in a dimly lit kitchen. An old man sits at the table, his hands trembling as he flips through a pile of bills. The house is quiet, too quiet. Once, it was filled with the sound of children's laughter, family dinners, promises of a future that seemed certain. Now, the only sound is the weight of numbers, numbers that will never add up. This was supposed to be his time. The years he dreamed about while working double shifts, the reward for a lifetime of sacrifice. The retirement years, the golden horizon promised by America itself. But the gold has turned to rust. The dream has curdled into something unrecognizable. He looks at the letter in his hand, his pension has been cut. His savings, once secure, now barely cover medicine. He will not travel. He will not rest. He will survive, if he can. This story isn't his alone. It belongs to millions. Behind the curtain of glossy retirement brochures and smiling television ads, lies a truth too unsettling to speak aloud. America's retirement dream is collapsing, and no one is prepared for the cost. The real question is not what went wrong, but whether this was ever truly meant to work at all. Hey, if you're enjoying this video, don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss any of our future videos. And drop a comment below letting us know where you're watching from and what time it is there. We'd love to see where our viewers are tuning in from. The American retirement dream was born not in silence, but in triumph. It was the mid-20th century, and a nation scarred by war had turned its eyes toward peace, prosperity, and the future. For the first time in history, ordinary workers, men and women who spent their lives on factory floors, in classrooms, behind counters, could imagine something once unthinkable, an old age without toil. The promise was simple, elegant, and powerful. Work hard, stay loyal, and one day the system will take care of you. This wasn't just a slogan, it was a cultural contract. Corporations offered pensions, unions fought for dignity, and the government stood as a safety net. Retirement was not a dream reserved for the wealthy, it was rebranded as the destiny of the American middle class. Television commercials in the 1950s and 60s sold it like paradise. Gray-haired couples walked along beaches, their children and grandchildren running ahead in the surf. Brochures showed backyard barbecues, RVs rolling down open highways, cruise ships gliding through turquoise waters. Retirement was no longer an end. It was a second life, brighter and freer than the first. But beneath the surface, shadows stirred. Even at the peak of optimism, cracks had begun to form. The first crack was longevity. Medical advances extended life expectancy by nearly 2 decades across the 20th century. What once meant 5 or 10 years of post-work life suddenly stretched into 20 or 30. More years meant more cost, more food, more medicine, more housing. And while human lives expanded, financial safety nets did not. The second crack was inflation. In the 1970s, the cost of living surged, gnawing away at the purchasing power of pensions. A worker who retired in 1965 could buy groceries, pay rent, and visit the doctor with relative ease. A retiree a decade later discovered the same check barely covered the basics. And the third crack was greed. Corporations had once seen pensions as a badge of honor, a symbol of loyalty to the men and women who built their empires. But over time, executives began to view pensions differently, not as promises, but as liabilities, debts that cut into quarterly profits. Slowly, quietly, companies began closing plans, freezing benefits, or declaring bankruptcy to escape their obligations. Imagine the story of Helen, a schoolteacher in Ohio. She worked 37 years, pouring her life into classrooms filled with children. Her pension was modest, but enough to promise stability. Yet when her district faced budget cuts, her benefits were reduced. In her 70s, she found herself working part-time at a grocery store, scanning items under fluorescent lights, her body aching with every shift. Retirement for Helen was not freedom, it was survival. Her story is not fiction. It is a reflection of millions. A 2023 study revealed that nearly 50% of Americans approaching retirement have no savings at all. Among those who do, the median nest egg is less than $90,000, barely enough to sustain even a modest lifestyle for more than a few years. The numbers speak a haunting truth: the dream is slipping away. But numbers alone cannot capture the weight of what is lost. Retirement was never just about money, it was about dignity. The idea that after decades of work, you could finally claim rest. That life had a rhythm, a beginning, middle, and peaceful end. Instead, America's retirees find themselves in a paradox. They are living longer, but dying poorer. They are healthier in body, yet sicker in spirit. The rocking chair that once symbolized peace now represents fear. Fear of running out, of becoming a burden, of being forgotten. And as these stories unfold, the deeper question begins to emerge. Was the promise of retirement ever truly real, or was it always an illusion designed to keep the workforce obedient, hopeful, and silent? The next chapter will take us back to the origins of that promise. To the history of pensions, to the rise of Social Security, and to the quiet deals struck in smoke-filled rooms, deals that would shape not only the lives of workers then, but the uncertain futures of generations yet to come. The phrase, golden years, entered American vocabulary in the mid-20th century, whispered like a promise, repeated in glossy ads and retirement seminars. It was a vision crafted as carefully as any Hollywood script, an aging couple walking hand in hand, the setting sun glistening against their silver hair, their worries dissolving into the horizon. But shadows always follow light. And the golden years were never as golden as they seemed. When Social Security was first signed into law in 1935, America was in the depths of the Great Depression. Millions of older Americans were destitute, dependent on their children, or worse, left alone to fend for themselves in poverty. The program was meant to be a lifeline, not a luxury. It promised a modest safety net, just enough to prevent starvation, just enough to keep dignity intact. By the 1950s and 60s, as the American middle class flourished, that lifeline was transformed into something more. Suddenly, retirement was no longer survival, it was marketed as leisure. Retirement communities began to sprout in Florida, Arizona, California. Developers carved entire towns out of the desert, selling not just homes, but lifestyles, golf courses, swimming pools, dance halls. Television commercials played on loop, showing men in Hawaiian shirts and women in sundresses sipping cocktails by the pool. But behind the smiles were numbers that didn't add up. Social Security was designed when average life expectancy was just 61 years. Most workers would contribute through their working lives, but many would not live long enough to collect benefits. It was sustainable in an era when people retired at 65 and died soon after. But by the 1970s, Americans were living into their 70s and 80s. What was once a short bridge into the end of life became decades of dependence. The math was changing, but the illusion remained. Take the story of Robert and June, a couple who retired in 1978. They moved to a small retirement community in Florida, their modest savings and Social Security checks enough to cover the basics. For the first few years, it felt like paradise. They played shuffleboard, hosted barbecues, watched their grandchildren visit every summer. But then June fell ill. Her medical bills began to pile up, and soon Robert realized their dream was fragile. The shuffleboard courts grew quiet. The barbecues stopped. And the golden years became a shadow of survival. Their story was echoed across the nation. By the 1980s, healthcare costs had begun to spiral. Prescription drugs, once affordable, became financial burdens. Long-term care, nursing homes, and hospital stays consumed savings at an alarming rate. Families who once imagined freedom discovered dependency on children, on neighbors, on the very government programs meant only as backstops. And still, the dream was sold. Retirement planners filled hotel ballrooms with hopeful seniors, presenting charts that promised security with the right investments. Banks and brokerage firms launched advertising campaigns filled with slogans about planning your future and making your money work for you. But what they rarely admitted was the risk: markets crash, inflation devours savings, pensions can vanish overnight. A chilling fact emerged: nearly half of retirees in America would rely on Social Security as their primary or sole source of income. Not savings, not pensions, not investments, just a government check, modest and fragile. The golden years were slipping into gray. Consider the town of Youngstown, Ohio. Once a booming steel city, it collapsed under the weight of deindustrialization in the 1970s. Thousands lost jobs, pensions evaporated, and families who thought they had secured their retirement faced ruin. Churches began hosting food pantries not for the unemployed, but for the elderly. Men and women who had worked their entire lives stood quietly in line for donated bread and canned soup, their dignity fractured. And yet, advertisements continued to show sunsets, golf clubs, cruise ships. The shadow of reality was hidden beneath the glow of illusion. This duality, dream versus reality, was not accidental. It was engineered. Retirement had become an industry, and industries survive on hope. Developers sold homes. Banks sold retirement accounts. Insurance companies sold annuities. Pharmaceutical companies sold the promise of longer life. Every step of the way, profit was carved from the hopes of ordinary Americans. But for every glossy brochure, there was a kitchen table where bills piled higher than pensions. For every smiling television couple, there was a widow forced back into part-time work. For every golden year, there was a shadow waiting just beyond the edge of the frame. The truth was simple, but devastating: retirement in America was no longer a guarantee of rest. It was a gamble. Some would win, those with wealth, strong pensions, or extraordinary luck. But for the majority, the dice were loaded from the start. And as the decades unfolded, the gamble would only grow riskier. For in the next stage of this story, the very foundation of retirement would shift. The pension system, the covenant between worker and company, would begin to collapse. What replaced it was not safety, but speculation. Not certainty, but risk. The golden years were already darkening. But the storm had only just begun. Next chapter, we travel back to the birth of the retirement illusion, the rise of pensions, the deals made between corporations and workers, and how those promises began to unravel, setting the stage for America's great financial gamble. Retirement in America did not begin as a dream. It began as a bargain. In the early decades of the 20th century, most working-class Americans never lived long enough to consider what life after work might look like. Factories demanded endless hours, coal mines swallowed men whole, and the farms of rural America left families wrinkled and broken before their time. Old age was not a reward, it was a sentence. You worked until you could no longer stand, and when your body failed, you depended on your children, your neighbors, or charity. It was the Great Depression that exposed the fragility of this reality. Millions of older Americans, stripped of jobs and savings, faced destitution. Photographs of the time show weathered faces lined with despair, men sitting on stoops with signs that read, "Will work for food." Families forced to choose between feeding their children or caring for aging parents. It was in this atmosphere of desperation that Franklin Delano Roosevelt signed the Social Security Act of 1935, creating the foundation of what we know today. It was never meant to be generous. The checks were modest, a threadbare safety net designed to prevent starvation. But to those who had nothing, it was a lifeline. As the decades passed, corporations began to add another layer to this safety net: pensions. In smoky boardrooms, executives and union leaders struck deals that would define generations. Companies promised their workers something extraordinary: loyalty repaid in dignity. 30 or 40 years of service would be rewarded with a monthly check for life. To a factory worker in Pittsburgh, a schoolteacher in Chicago, or a machinist in Detroit, the promise felt unshakable. It was not charity, it was justice. You gave your youth, your sweat, your very body to the company, and in return, you were guaranteed a measure of peace in your final years. By the 1950s, pensions became not only common but expected. Nearly half of the American workforce was covered by employer-sponsored retirement plans. The promise was intoxicating: a secure, predictable income until death. Advertisements showed smiling retirees fishing, gardening, enjoying grandchildren, images that planted the seed of the retirement dream. But behind the promise, cracks were already forming. The pension system relied on assumptions that would not hold forever. It assumed workers would retire at 65 and live only a few more years. It assumed corporations would remain profitable indefinitely. It assumed loyalty between company and worker would remain unbroken. Those assumptions would not survive the economic storms of the late 20th century. The story of Bethlehem Steel is a haunting example. Once one of America's largest steel producers, it employed hundreds of thousands. Generations of men walked through its gates believing their pensions were secure. But when the company declared bankruptcy in 2001, it terminated pensions for over 95,000 workers and retirees. Men in their 70s and 80s who had worked their entire lives suddenly received letters telling them the checks they depended on were gone, or reduced to a fraction. The dream dissolved overnight. It wasn't just steel. Airlines, automakers, retailers, all began to chip away at pension obligations. Some froze benefits, others offloaded responsibility to the government's Pension Benefit Guaranty Corporation, which could not keep pace with the avalanche of corporate collapses. But while pensions crumbled, another system was waiting in the shadows, ready to take their place: the 401k. Created almost by accident in the late 1970s, the 401k was originally designed as a tax shelter for executives. But soon, corporations realized its potential. Instead of guaranteeing workers a lifetime income, they could shift the responsibility, and the risk, onto the workers themselves. Wall Street embraced the change, selling dreams of compound growth, stock market riches, and personal control. It sounded liberating. It was, in truth, a gamble. For the first time, workers were told their future depended not on loyalty, but on their ability to navigate financial markets. They became investors whether they wanted to or not. And the risk was immense. Markets rise, but they also fall. Retirement accounts could double in a bull market, or be halved in a crash, as millions discovered in 2008. The birth of the retirement illusion was complete. What had begun as a promise of dignity had morphed into a high-stakes bet on forces beyond the control of ordinary Americans. The rocking chair on the porch was still there, but whether it would ever be occupied in peace was no longer a certainty. It was a question mark. Consider the case of Linda, a nurse who spent 40 years in the healthcare system. She diligently contributed to her 401k, trusting the financial advice handed to her in glossy brochures. When the 2008 financial crisis hit, her savings were slashed in half. She delayed her retirement, working into her 70s, her body weary, her spirit broken. She had done everything right, and still, the dream slipped away. The illusion persisted because hope is powerful. People wanted to believe. They needed to believe. And corporations, banks, and investment firms were eager to sell them that belief, with every commercial, every brochure, every seminar promising that a comfortable retirement is within reach. But as history has shown, illusions eventually fracture. And when they do, the truth beneath is darker than anyone dares admit. The golden promise had shifted. Pensions were fading, Social Security was strained, and the 401k had tethered the fate of millions to the volatility of Wall Street. The retirement dream was no longer built on promises. It was built on speculation. And as we step deeper into this story, we will see how the gamble was not a bug in the system, it was the system itself. A design that profited not from securing retirements, but from keeping them forever uncertain. The shadows of the golden years had grown darker. But in the next chapter, we will uncover the heart of the betrayal, the rise and fall of pensions, the corporations that abandoned their workers, and the quiet devastation that followed. Next chapter, we dive into pension promises and broken futures, the covenant between company and worker, how it unraveled, and the hidden human cost left in its wake. The promise of the pension was once sacred. It was a vow whispered between corporations and their workers, a covenant sealed not in ink alone, but in trust. For decades, men and women gave their bodies to the assembly line, their sweat to the fields, their loyalty to the company. And in return, they were told they would never be abandoned. Retirement would be secure. Their twilight years would be free of fear. But promises are only as strong as the institutions that keep them. And when those institutions faltered, the futures of millions cracked like glass beneath the weight of betrayal. Consider the auto plants of Detroit. In the 1950s and 60s, they stood as cathedrals of American industry. Generations of workers, fathers and sons, mothers and daughters, labored under their roofs. They were told, "Give us your years, and we will give you peace." Pensions were not just numbers on paper, they were the invisible bond that kept workers tied to the company through strikes, recessions, and hardship. But by the 1980s, the story began to change. Globalization crept in. Competition from overseas grew fierce. Companies, once flush with profit, began cutting costs, and pensions became targets. What was once considered a moral obligation was redefined as a financial burden. Executives who once stood before their workers and promised dignity in retirement now sat in boardrooms calculating liabilities. And pensions, those symbols of loyalty, became liabilities to be trimmed, restructured, or erased. Bethlehem Steel was among the most tragic of these betrayals. At its peak, it was a titan of industry, employing over 300,000 workers. To the men who bent steel with their bare hands, the pension was a guarantee written into their very identity. But in 2001, the company filed for bankruptcy. Overnight, tens of thousands of retirees saw their pensions slashed. Many received letters informing them that the checks they depended on, checks for groceries, for medicine, for rent, would now be reduced to a fraction. Others lost benefits entirely. Imagine standing at the mailbox, opening that envelope, and realizing the life you had planned for decades had evaporated. Years of loyalty reduced to nothing more than ink on paper, now void. For many, it was not just financial ruin, it was psychological collapse. This story repeated itself across America. Airline workers saw pensions gutted after deregulation. Teachers and public employees in struggling states faced broken promises as governments restructured debt. Coal miners, who spent lifetimes underground, their lungs filled with dust, watched as pension funds dwindled, despite generations of sacrifice. Behind each story was a cruel irony. The same corporations that pleaded poverty often paid their executives millions. Boardrooms redefined obligations not as promises to people, but as numbers in a ledger. Loyalty flowed only upward. Workers were expendable, promises were negotiable. The ripple effects of these betrayals stretched far beyond the retirees themselves. Families fractured under the strain. Children, expecting to see their parents live comfortably, found themselves supporting them instead. Entire communities, once stable with pension-backed households, collapsed into poverty. The betrayal was not just individual, it was collective. And yet, amid the ruins, the advertising never changed. Companies still spoke of retirement as a golden horizon. Brochures promised comfort. Politicians spoke of dignity. But the reality was darker. The American worker was now entering retirement not with certainty, but with doubt. One of the most haunting truths about pensions is how they revealed the fragility of trust. Workers had no control over how pensions were managed. They could not see the boardroom discussions, the investment strategies, the quiet siphoning of funds. They believed because they had to. Trust was the only option. And when that trust was broken, it left scars that no amount of money could heal. Statistics reveal the magnitude of the betrayal. Between 1980 and 2006, the percentage of private sector workers covered by defined benefit pensions fell from nearly 40% to less than 20%. Today, the number is closer to 10%. What was once the backbone of retirement security has all but vanished. In its place, the 401k rose, a system designed not to guarantee security, but to gamble it. Retirement was no longer a promise, it was a risk placed on the shoulders of individuals. And if those individuals failed to navigate Wall Street storms, they paid the price. But before we move to that gamble, we must sit with the silence of the broken promise. Imagine the faces of those who worked a lifetime in steel, in coal, in airlines, in schools. Imagine them holding letters that told them their futures were gone. Imagine the quiet despair of knowing that what you believed in most was never as solid as you thought. Retirement in America had shifted. The pension system, the foundation of the dream, had crumbled. And what replaced it was not safety, but speculation. As the camera fades to black, one question lingers: was the betrayal inevitable, or was it engineered? In the next chapter, we step into the storm of the 401k, a system that promised freedom, but delivered volatility, risk, and dependence on a market that could turn against you in a single night. Next chapter, the 401k gamble, how Wall Street turned retirement into a casino, and why millions of Americans discovered too late that their golden years were built on shifting sand. The collapse of pensions did not leave a void, it created an opportunity. And Wall Street was waiting. In 1978, a little-known section of the tax code, Section 401k, was quietly passed into law. It was never intended to reshape the future of retirement. In fact, it was designed as a loophole, a way for executives to defer taxes on bonuses and stock options. But in the shadows of pension collapse, corporations and financial firms saw something else. They saw a chance to shift responsibility away from themselves and onto workers, while profiting in the process. The 401k was presented as freedom. No longer would workers depend on companies or unions. They could now own their retirement. They could choose how much to save, where to invest, and how to grow their nest egg. It was sold as empowerment: take control of your future, the ads declared, make your money work for you. But empowerment was only half the story. What workers were not told was that they were also inheriting the risk. Unlike pensions, which guaranteed a fixed income for life, the 401k offered no certainty. Its value rose and fell with the stock market, with inflation, with recessions. A lifetime of savings could be halved in a single crash. And unlike corporations, individual workers had no lobbyists, no government bailouts, no hedge funds to protect them. They were exposed, naked against the storms of Wall Street. The gamble had begun. Consider the crash of 2008. Millions of Americans watched as their retirement accounts evaporated. Years, sometimes decades, of savings vanished in a matter of weeks. A man in his early 60s, hoping to retire within a year, suddenly saw his 401k cut nearly in half. Instead of retiring, he worked another decade, his dreams delayed, his body weary. A woman in her late 50s, planning to downsize and live comfortably, was forced back into the workforce after her savings collapsed. For many, the golden years dissolved into gray uncertainty. And yet, the machine continued. Wall Street profited enormously from the 401k revolution. Every dollar contributed was a dollar invested in mutual funds, ETFs, and stocks, products layered with fees, commissions, and hidden costs. Even in years when the market fell, firms collected their share. Retirement accounts were not just a lifeline for workers, they were a pipeline for Wall Street profits. By the 1990s, the shift was nearly complete. The majority of private sector pensions had disappeared, replaced almost entirely by 401k-style plans. What was once a guarantee had become a gamble. The weight of retirement now rested not on corporations, but on individuals navigating a financial world they barely understood. The language surrounding retirement changed as well. No longer was it spoken of as a right earned through loyalty, it became a personal responsibility. If you failed, it was your fault. You should have saved more, invested smarter, worked longer. The burden shifted, not just financially, but psychologically. Workers carried not only risk, but blame. And yet, even those who did everything right were not safe. Take the story of David, an accountant who meticulously contributed to his 401k for 3 decades. He diversified, followed every piece of advice, never withdrew early. But when the dot-com bubble burst in 2000, he lost nearly 40% of his savings. 8 years later, the financial crisis of 2008 wiped out another third. By the time he reached retirement, his nest egg was less than half of what he expected. His story reveals the haunting truth: in a system built on speculation, discipline is no guarantee of safety. The 401k was not merely a financial tool, it was a cultural shift. It rewired the American retirement dream from one of certainty to one of risk. It placed ordinary workers into the role of investors, gamblers in a market designed to favor the house. And the house, as history shows, always wins. Statistics underscore the failure. Today, the median 401k balance for Americans in their 60s is just over $200,000. At first glance, that number seems substantial. But stretched over a retirement that could last 20 or 30 years, it amounts to less than $1,000 per month, barely enough to cover rent, food, and medicine, let alone the visions of travel and leisure once promised. And yet, the advertising persists. Commercials still show smiling retirees on cruises, golf courses, and beach vacations. The dream is still sold, even as the reality grows darker. Because the dream is not just hope, it is business. Billions of dollars flow through the system every year, feeding industries built on the illusions of security. But beneath the polished surfaces lies the quiet truth: America's retirement is no longer a promise. It is a wager. Every paycheck becomes a bet on markets, on politics, on forces far beyond an individual's control. Some will win, yes. But many will lose. And as the nation ages, the losses will not be silent. They will echo in families forced to support aging parents, in communities hollowed out by elder poverty, in a generation watching their dreams collapse in real time. The 401k gamble was not an accident. It was engineered. It shifted risk away from corporations and onto workers, away from institutions and onto individuals. And in doing so, it redefined retirement not as dignity earned, but as fortune won, or lost. The dice have been rolled. The house is watching. And millions of Americans are waiting for a future that may never come. As the camera fades, one question remains: if retirement is now a gamble, who really holds the cards? In the next chapter, we explore the answer: how Wall Street's quiet hand has shaped not only retirement accounts, but the very destiny of the American dream itself. Next chapter, Wall Street's quiet hand in retirement, the hidden deals, the financial engineering, and how an entire generation's future was tied to markets they could never control. Retirement in America is not just about workers, wages, or pensions. It is, in large part, about Wall Street, a vast, invisible force shaping the future of millions, quietly, relentlessly, often without their knowledge. The birth of the 401k did more than shift responsibility from corporations to individuals. It tethered the destiny of retirees directly to financial markets. Every contribution, every paycheck invested, was a seed planted in an ecosystem where the rules were invisible, the players powerful, and the consequences immense. Consider the market crashes of 2000 and 2008. These were not just economic events, they were seismic shocks that reshaped lives. Millions lost decades of savings overnight. Jobs, homes, and dignity evaporated in hours, yet the forces behind the crashes remained distant, inscrutable, almost untouchable. Wall Street thrived, profiting from fees, trades, and bailouts, while ordinary Americans struggled to recover. But the manipulation of retirement extends beyond crashes. Mutual funds, ETFs, and investment vehicles are carefully designed to maximize profit, not guarantee security. Hidden fees silently chip away at balances year after year. Advisory services, even those marketed as fiduciary, often come with conflicts of interest. The system is engineered so that those with the most knowledge and capital, executives, institutional investors, hedge funds, benefit the most, while the average worker bears risk, often unknowingly. Take the story of Margaret, a nurse in her late 50s. She contributed diligently to her 401k, choosing funds labeled safe and conservative. Yet after subtle changes in fund management and fees, her balance shrank over time. By the time she approached retirement, she realized she had little control over what should have been her security. The dream of a peaceful retirement had been quietly stolen, piece by piece, by a system designed to obscure risk. The human cost is staggering. Families postpone retirement, children are called back to support aging parents, and communities once reliant on pensions see increased elder poverty. According to the Economic Policy Institute, 1 in 5 Americans over the age of 65 lives in or near poverty. Many more face financial insecurity so severe it undermines their health, well-being, and dignity. Wall Street's hand is quiet, but its influence is pervasive. From the design of retirement accounts to the structuring of corporate pension obligations, from the promotion of mutual funds to the fees embedded in every transaction, every decision subtly shapes the outcomes of millions. Yet the average American rarely sees this hand, rarely understands it, and rarely has the tools to resist it. And so the illusion persists: commercials, brochures, seminars, all promising security and freedom, while the machinery behind the scenes quietly shifts risk, maximizes profit, and ensures that only the savvy or fortunate truly thrive. The stakes are enormous. For the average worker, a single market downturn can erase decades of contributions, eroding not just savings, but hope. But even the most diligent are not immune. Take the example of David, an accountant whose retirement story was already fraught with loss during the dot-com bubble and the 2008 crash. Even after diversifying, following professional advice, and contributing for decades, subtle market manipulations, hidden fees, and economic volatility ensured his security remained tenuous. It became clear, knowledge and discipline alone were no longer enough. Wall Street's quiet hand has reshaped the entire notion of retirement. What was once a promise between worker and corporation is now a wager against a system that most cannot see, much less control. And as the nation ages, the gap between expectation and reality widens. Millions enter retirement thinking they are in control, only to discover that control was an illusion. And yet, this quiet domination is rarely discussed publicly. The media highlights crises and crashes, but seldom the mechanisms, the fees, the structures, and the engineering behind them. Retirement is marketed as empowerment, while it is often entrapment. Freedom becomes dependence, and hope becomes anxiety. Imagine walking into your golden years with your life savings, only to find that every element, stocks, funds, fees, market timing, is subtly stacked against you. The system is complex, opaque, and designed to favor the invisible elite. And yet, it is sold as opportunity, choice, and empowerment. The irony is bitter. Americans have been told for decades that retirement is a reward for hard work, a chance to rest, to enjoy life. But the very architecture of the system ensures that only a few will achieve this dream. For the majority, the golden years are shadows, years marked by uncertainty, anxiety, and dependence. And as the camera lingers on quiet suburbs, empty porches, and the faces of those nearing retirement, the question becomes clear: how did a nation built on promises of security allow a system so opaque, so unforgiving, to dictate the lives of its elderly? The answer will lead us deeper into the human cost of retirement. In the next chapter, we explore the debt that follows you into old age, how personal loans, medical bills, and credit traps entwine with retirement, pulling millions into a cycle of financial insecurity they can never escape. Next chapter, the debt that follows you into old age, the quiet, relentless accumulation of financial obligations that turns what should be a sanctuary into a trap, and the families caught in between. Retirement was supposed to be a refuge. A place where decades of labor finally yielded rest. But for millions of Americans, the golden years are haunted not by freedom, but by debt. Debt does not announce itself with sirens. It creeps quietly, insidiously. A medical bill left unpaid. A credit card balance carried over month after month. A loan taken to cover living expenses. By the time most retirees notice, the weight is crushing. It is a shadow that follows relentlessly, a companion that no one invited. Consider Harold, a retired factory worker in Ohio. For 40 years, he labored in the steel mills, dreaming of a future where he could relax, travel, and spend time with his grandchildren. He paid into his pension, contributed to Social Security, saved diligently. But then his wife became ill. Medical bills mounted faster than his savings could grow. They drained the pension, tapped the 401k, and still had to borrow from family to cover costs. In the end, Harold's retirement was not golden, it was a maze of debts, each step forward offset by another liability. Debt in retirement comes in many forms. Credit card balances, once manageable, grow with compounding interest. Mortgages linger even after the house is paid off in principal, thanks to property taxes and maintenance. Car loans, personal loans, reverse mortgages, payday advances, all intertwine with healthcare expenses, prescription costs, and long-term care. For many, the math no longer adds up. A 2022 study revealed that nearly 40% of seniors over the age of 65 carry some form of debt. Among those, the average balance exceeds $60,000. For people living on fixed incomes, these numbers are not statistics, they are lifelines fraying under pressure, daily reminders that their dream of security has evaporated. Medical debt is particularly insidious. One emergency room visit, one broken hip, one prescription can shatter even the most meticulously planned retirement. Unlike wages during working years, retirement income is often fixed. Social Security checks do not rise to meet unexpected expenses. Savings, if they exist, are limited. Debt grows, silently, inexorably, eroding dignity along with financial stability. Families are drawn into the cycle. Adult children often become caregivers and financial backstops, shouldering the burdens of their parents. In homes across America, conversations around the dinner table revolve not around legacy or joy, but around bills, repayment plans, and impossible choices. Sacrifices are made quietly, often unacknowledged, as the elderly struggle to maintain autonomy in the face of financial dependence. Yet, society largely ignores this growing crisis. Retirement planning seminars, financial blogs, and government brochures speak of saving, investing, and compounding returns, but rarely of debt that lurks in the shadows, waiting to undo decades of work. The narrative is carefully curated. If you plan correctly, the dream is attainable. The reality is far more complex. For millions, life savings are a fragile raft in a stormy sea of medical costs, interest rates, and unforeseen expenses. And it is not just individual debt that threatens retirees. Systemic factors amplify the problem. Inflation steadily erodes purchasing power, particularly affecting those on fixed incomes. Housing costs, healthcare premiums, and even everyday necessities rise faster than Social Security adjustments. The result, retirees are forced to borrow to maintain even a modest lifestyle. Debt is no longer an anomaly, it is a feature of retirement itself. Take the story of Clara, a retired schoolteacher in Florida. She saved diligently, invested carefully, and planned for decades. Yet when hurricane damage forced unexpected home repairs, and her health insurance failed to cover certain procedures, she found herself taking out loans to stay afloat. The very house she had hoped would be a sanctuary became a source of anxiety, a reminder that security is not guaranteed, no matter how much one prepares. The psychological toll is as real as the financial. Anxiety, depression, and stress are rampant among indebted seniors. The quiet fear of running out of money, of being unable to afford medication, of becoming dependent on others, creates a constant background tension. Sleep is broken, appetite suppressed, relationships strained. Retirement, once envisioned as peaceful, becomes a continuous struggle. Debt in old age is also a generational story. Children inherit responsibility, emotionally and financially. Adult sons and daughters often postpone their own dreams to support parents. They navigate insurance paperwork, negotiate with creditors, and manage healthcare appointments, effectively stepping into a system not designed to accommodate anyone fairly. The burden is invisible to the broader society, yet it is profound. And yet, despite these hardships, the narrative of the American retirement dream persists. Television, advertising, and political rhetoric still promise leisure, travel, and freedom. But for those living amid debt, the message rings hollow. It is a dissonance that deepens the shadow over the golden years, a quiet betrayal of trust, expectation, and effort. Debt in retirement is more than numbers on a page. It is a force that shapes decisions, relationships, and dignity. It forces retirees to compromise on healthcare, nutrition, and comfort. It dictates whether they live independently or in assisted care. It drives families apart or binds them together under the pressure of necessity. The weight is relentless, and for many, the consequences are lifelong. The dream of financial freedom, once promised with certainty, has been replaced by a maze of obligations, a daily calculation of risk, and a constant negotiation with fate. As we step further into this story, the focus will shift from individual debt to systemic pressures, how industries, policies, and institutions have shaped a retirement landscape in which security is elusive, uncertainty is the norm, and the promise of golden years remains tantalizingly out of reach. The shadow of debt is long, and it follows relentlessly into old age. And in the next chapter, we explore the families caught in the middle, the human stories behind the numbers, the sacrifices, the compromises, and the emotional cost of caring for aging parents in a system rigged against security. Next chapter, families divided by care and cost, the untold struggles of intergenerational responsibility, and how retirement debt and insecurity fracture families across the nation. Retirement was meant to be a reward for a lifetime of labor. But for millions of Americans, it has become a battleground, where families are caught between duty, survival, and the crushing weight of financial insecurity. The image of grandparents enjoying sunny afternoons with grandchildren, passing down stories and wisdom, is deeply ingrained in American culture. Yet behind the idyllic scenes are stories of tension, compromise, and sacrifice. The financial fragility of retirees often forces families into impossible decisions. Adult children may delay their own dreams, postponing careers, marriages, or starting their own families, to shoulder the cost of their parents' survival. Take the story of the Martinez family in Phoenix, Arizona. Carlos and Maria worked tirelessly for decades, raising 3 children while contributing to their modest retirement savings. When Carlos fell ill in his 60s, medical bills began to pile up faster than the couple could handle. Their children, already burdened by student loans and housing costs, had no choice but to step in. They split the family home into apartments to generate rental income, took on personal loans, and rearranged their careers to provide care. The golden years promised in brochures became a tangle of work, debt, and compromise. Across the United States, this is a common narrative. According to a 2023 Pew Research report, nearly 25% of adults in their 40s and 50s are financially supporting both their children and their aging parents simultaneously. These sandwich generation caregivers live with constant pressure, balancing their own financial needs with the often overwhelming costs of elder care. Retirement becomes not a celebration, but a shared burden. The emotional cost is profound. Adult children navigate resentment, guilt, and exhaustion. Parents struggle to maintain independence while knowing their survival increasingly depends on others. Siblings clash over responsibilities, and relationships strain under the unspoken pressure of money and care. Homes once designed for comfort transform into arenas of negotiation, compromise, and quiet frustration. Consider Evelyn, a retired nurse in rural Ohio. Her pension was insufficient to cover her medical bills. Her 2 adult children worked long hours, juggling jobs and caregiving duties. Despite their efforts, Evelyn often felt guilty for being a burden. She hid her pain, skipped meals, and refused additional medical treatment to spare her children further strain. The stress was invisible to neighbors, yet it permeated every corner of the home. Debt compounds these difficulties. Credit card bills, loans, and healthcare expenses intertwine, forcing families into a constant state of financial triage. Choices become stark: should they pay for medication or housing? Utilities or groceries? Each decision carries consequences, shaping relationships, mental health, and long-term well-being. This struggle is amplified in communities already struggling economically. In cities like Youngstown, Detroit, and Cleveland, where industrial decline decimated pensions and savings, entire neighborhoods bear the brunt of intergenerational financial strain. Seniors rely on their children to make ends meet. Adult children delay retirement themselves, work multiple jobs, or live paycheck to support aging parents. The cycle becomes self-perpetuating, trapping families in a web of compromise and anxiety. Even when families manage to cover basic needs, emotional tension remains. Conversations about money become battles of pride, guilt, and obligation. Parents feel indebted to their children even as they once provided for them. Children feel trapped by responsibility, caught between love and resentment. The golden vision of retirement fades, replaced by a landscape of survival and negotiation. And yet, society rarely acknowledges this reality. Media coverage often focuses on individual failures, while systemic pressures, rising healthcare costs, insufficient pensions, and the fragility of Social Security, are largely ignored. Retirement is marketed as a personal achievement, a reward for hard work, rather than the precarious, interdependent state it has become. Families navigate a delicate dance, balancing care, finances, and emotional well-being, often without guidance or support. Policies that were designed to protect the elderly are underfunded or fragmented. Social programs intended to aid retirees barely scratch the surface. Private insurance is expensive, often leaving families to fill the gaps with personal resources. The human toll is profound. Anxiety, depression, and chronic stress are common among caregivers and aging parents alike. Relationships fracture, homes become battlegrounds, and dreams of leisure and freedom dissolve. Retirement, once a symbol of accomplishment, becomes a complex negotiation between survival, dignity, and familial obligation. Yet amid the strain, there are moments of resilience. Families adapt, create systems of support, and find small victories in the face of financial uncertainty. Children learn resourcefulness, parents discover unexpected strength, and communities come together in informal networks to share knowledge and assistance. These stories reveal the quiet heroism of ordinary people navigating an extraordinary crisis. But resilience has limits. The pressures of debt, insufficient income, and aging complicate decision-making and long-term planning. Even the strongest families face the harsh reality: retirement in America is not guaranteed security. It is an intricate puzzle, constantly shifting, demanding sacrifices, and exacting an emotional toll few predicted. The shadow of financial insecurity stretches across generations, shaping not just the lives of retirees, but the trajectories of their children, grandchildren, and communities. The promise of golden years is replaced with an uneasy reality: survival, compromise, and quiet endurance. In the next chapter, we explore the cost of healthcare in retirement, how escalating medical expenses, pharmaceutical costs, and long-term care threaten the dreams and dignity of seniors across America, and why even modest savings are often insufficient to weather the storm. Next chapter, the cost of healthcare in retirement, the hidden financial traps of medicine, insurance, and long-term care, and the devastating impact on families and individuals entering their later years. Retirement, in theory, should be a time of relief. Decades of work, decades of contribution to Social Security and pensions, should culminate in rest, in freedom, in a sense of security. But for millions of Americans, retirement is haunted by a more immediate, relentless force: healthcare costs. Medical bills do not wait. They do not negotiate. They arrive unannounced, quietly at first: a check for a routine procedure, a letter for a lab test, a prescription refill. But the amounts accumulate, snowballing into an avalanche that can overwhelm even the most carefully planned retirement. The reality is stark. According to a 2023 report from Fidelity Investments, the average retired couple in the United States will need over $315,000 to cover healthcare expenses in retirement, far exceeding what most Americans have saved. This estimate includes premiums, out-of-pocket costs, long-term care, and prescription drugs. Yet, fewer than half of retirees have savings anywhere near this amount. The gap between expectation and reality is staggering. Consider the story of Frank, a retired firefighter in New Jersey. He had contributed to his pension faithfully for over 30 years, paired with Social Security benefits and modest personal savings. But when a heart condition required surgery, his costs escalated beyond imagination. Even with insurance coverage, co-pays, deductibles, and rehabilitation expenses quickly consumed his savings. For Frank, the dream of a peaceful retirement was replaced by constant worry about bills, about sustaining his home, about maintaining dignity in the face of financial strain. Prescription costs alone are a hidden minefield. Drugs that were once affordable have skyrocketed over the decades. New therapies, while life-saving, are priced for profit, often far beyond what seniors can reasonably afford. Many retirees are forced into impossible decisions: skip medication, ration doses, or incur debt to maintain health. The consequences are physical, emotional, and financial. Long-term care is another silent predator. Nursing homes, assisted living facilities, and in-home care are essential for those who cannot manage independently. But costs are astronomical. The median annual cost for a private room in a nursing home exceeds $120,000, and in-home care averages $25 to $30 per hour. For most retirees, these expenses are unaffordable without draining every savings account, selling property, or relying on family. Insurance, once seen as a protective net, can exacerbate the crisis. Medicare, while valuable, does not cover everything. Prescription drugs, dental care, hearing aids, and long-term care are often excluded. Supplemental plans exist, but they are expensive and complex, requiring retirees to navigate bureaucracies they may not fully understand. Errors, omissions, and miscommunications can have catastrophic financial consequences. For families, the impact is profound. Adult children often step in to help cover costs, rearranging careers, taking on debt, and sacrificing their own futures to protect aging parents. The burden is not only financial, it is emotional, creating tension, guilt, and exhaustion. Siblings quarrel over responsibilities. Parents feel guilty for being a burden. The idealized vision of retirement is replaced by a relentless calculus of survival. The human cost is enormous. Anxiety, depression, and stress are common among seniors managing healthcare costs. Studies show that financial strain related to medical expenses is linked to a higher incidence of chronic illness, reduced life expectancy, and lower quality of life. Health and wealth are intertwined, and when one falters, the other suffers. Yet, society largely ignores the depth of this crisis. Healthcare inflation continues, policies are slow to adapt, and the narrative of a golden retirement persists in media and advertising. Seniors are often blamed for insufficient savings, while systemic factors, rising costs, inadequate coverage, corporate pricing strategies, remain largely unexamined. Even modest healthcare events can trigger financial ruin. A broken hip, a heart procedure, cancer treatment, or prolonged hospitalization can deplete savings overnight. Retirees who planned carefully, contributed diligently, and invested prudently still find themselves forced back into the workforce, borrowing, or relying on family. This is the quiet reality of healthcare and retirement. It is not simply a cost, it is a trap, a constant threat that shadows every decision, every choice, every dream of freedom. It shapes behavior, restricts mobility, and undermines autonomy. It transforms what should be a sanctuary into a battleground of bills, bureaucracy, and stress. The statistics are sobering. Over 60% of retirees report having difficulty affording at least one major healthcare expense. Nearly 40% go without recommended care due to cost. Millions are forced into debt to maintain basic health, their dignity slowly eroded in the process. And yet, the advertising continues. Brochures and seminars still promise ease, comfort, and leisure. Wall Street and insurance companies profit from the illusion that planning alone is enough, while the structural realities remain unchanged. Retirement becomes not a period of rest, but a negotiation with cost, risk, and survival. The golden years, it seems, are rarely golden. They are lived in tension, between health and cost, autonomy and dependence, hope and reality. And as we move forward in this story, the consequences of these pressures become even more evident, as retirees face not just financial challenges, but the emotional and psychological toll of an uncertain future. In the next chapter, we explore housing and the illusion of stability, how the dream of a secure home in retirement is undermined by market forces, rising costs, and the fragility of wealth built over decades. Next chapter, housing and the illusion of stability, the precarious nature of homeownership, reverse mortgages, and the financial and emotional costs of trying to stay sheltered in America's changing housing market. A home is supposed to be a sanctuary. The place where decades of work culminate in security, comfort, and familiarity. For retirees, it represents stability, the walls that have witnessed children growing, birthdays celebrated, and memories forged. But in modern America, even this symbol of permanence is fragile, vulnerable to the forces of economics, debt, and systemic inequities. Homeownership, once seen as the cornerstone of the American dream, is now a precarious endeavor. Rising property taxes, fluctuating markets, and decades of accumulated debt can turn a haven into a liability. For retirees, the house that was meant to provide security often becomes the source of anxiety, tethering them to financial obligations they may no longer be able to manage. Consider Barbara, a retired teacher in Michigan. She purchased her home in the early 1980s, believing that careful saving and prudent management would ensure a comfortable retirement. Yet by her 70s, property taxes had doubled, maintenance costs skyrocketed, and her fixed income struggled to keep pace. Selling was not an easy solution, markets were unstable, and she feared losing the home she had built her life around. The walls that once offered comfort had become instruments of stress. Housing instability in retirement is not merely financial, it is deeply emotional. Leaving a home means leaving a life, a history, and a sense of identity. Yet for many, it is unavoidable. Reverse mortgages, while marketed as a tool for liquidity, often come with hidden costs, high interest rates, and complex terms that can trap the unsuspecting. Seniors who take these loans may believe they are securing their future, only to discover that they have mortgaged not just their property, but their autonomy. The 2008 housing crisis revealed the fragility of this illusion. Millions of retirees found themselves underwater, with home values plummeting, mortgages exceeding the worth of the property, and little recourse. Communities that had relied on stable homeownership were decimated. Retirees lost not just wealth, but the psychological anchor of stability, the feeling that hard work had led to a secure home. Even outside of economic downturns, the cost of maintaining a home is a constant pressure. Utilities, insurance, repairs, and taxes rise relentlessly, while retirement income often remains fixed. Many seniors are forced to make painful trade-offs, skip essential maintenance, defer medical care, or rely on family support. The home becomes both a comfort and a burden, a duality that shapes decisions, limits mobility, and undermines the sense of freedom retirement promises. For families, the impact is magnified. Adult children often provide financial assistance, helping parents cover property taxes, repairs, or mortgage payments. This intergenerational dependency can strain relationships, force career compromises, and create resentment or guilt. Retirement, which should be a personal milestone, becomes a shared burden, a complex negotiation of resources and responsibilities. The emotional consequences are profound. Seniors who face housing insecurity report higher levels of stress, anxiety, and depression. Even those who manage to maintain ownership often feel trapped, unable to relocate for health reasons, family needs, or personal preference. The home, instead of being a sanctuary, becomes a gilded cage, symbolic of both achievement and vulnerability. Policies designed to protect retirees often fall short. Subsidized housing for seniors exists, but demand far exceeds supply. Programs like the Home Equity Conversion Mortgage offer solutions, but are complex, often misunderstood, and fraught with risk. Seniors navigating these options without guidance are exposed to exploitation and financial harm. The American dream of homeownership, so central to the cultural imagination, masks an uncomfortable reality. For retirees, stability is never guaranteed. Markets fluctuate, policies lag, and personal circumstances shift. The home that symbolizes decades of labor can transform into a liability almost overnight, undermining both financial security and psychological well-being. And yet, society rarely acknowledges this fragility. Media and politics continue to depict homeownership as a universal solution, an anchor of wealth and stability, ignoring the reality that for many seniors, it is a precarious balancing act. The dream persists, but the reality is often harsh, complicated, and deeply human. In the next chapter, we will explore the hidden crisis of retirement loneliness, how financial insecurity, housing instability, and societal neglect converge to isolate seniors, eroding the very social and emotional structures that retirement is supposed to protect. Next chapter, the hidden crisis of retirement loneliness, the emotional and social consequences of financial instability, debt, and housing insecurity, and the silent epidemic affecting millions of older Americans. Retirement was never meant to be lonely. After decades of work, the promise of freedom, community, and family engagement should have followed. Yet for millions of Americans, the golden years are quietly shadowed by isolation, a silent crisis that compounds the financial and physical hardships already confronting them. Loneliness in retirement is not merely emotional, it is structural, social, and systemic. Adult children live far from aging parents, communities shift and fragment, and financial insecurity limits social engagement. Retirees may have time, but lack the means to enjoy it. Clubs, travel, and social activities are expensive. Medical and housing concerns dominate attention. Over time, isolation grows like a slow fog, wrapping around the mind, body, and spirit. Consider Samuel, a retired postal worker in rural Pennsylvania. For decades, his life was a routine of work, community, and family. After retirement, he found himself confined to a small home, unable to afford transportation or social outings. Friends moved away or passed on, and the neighborhood he once knew became unfamiliar. His days became a cycle of quiet meals, television, and the creeping realization that he was invisible. The loneliness was palpable, a quiet erosion of dignity and hope. Statistics illuminate the scope of this crisis. According to a 2022 study by the National Institute on Aging, nearly 30% of adults over 65 report feeling socially isolated, and 1 in 5 experiences chronic loneliness. The impact is more than emotional. Loneliness has been linked to increased risks of depression, cognitive decline, cardiovascular disease, and mortality. Retirement, a period meant for rest, has become a period of vulnerability, not only financially, but socially and physically. Financial insecurity exacerbates the problem. Seniors who struggle with debt, medical bills, or insufficient retirement income are less able to participate in social activities. Travel, community engagement, and hobbies require funds many do not have. Social isolation becomes both a cause and a consequence of financial strain, creating a feedback loop that deepens vulnerability. Housing instability compounds loneliness. Seniors in assisted living or nursing facilities may be surrounded by people, yet feel isolated due to lack of meaningful interaction, cultural differences, or limited mobility. Homebound retirees may rely on adult children who are themselves overworked and stressed, reducing opportunities for genuine connection. The structures that should support community and engagement often fall short. Even technology, which promises connection, offers a mixed solution. Social media and video calls can bridge gaps, yet not all seniors are comfortable or able to use these tools. The generational divide can amplify feelings of disconnection, and virtual contact cannot fully replace the intimacy of face-to-face interaction. Loneliness intersects with health in insidious ways. Chronic stress and social isolation exacerbate existing conditions, complicate recovery from illness, and increase reliance on healthcare systems. In turn, rising medical costs contribute to further social withdrawal, as retirees prioritize spending on necessities over social engagement. The cycle is relentless. Families, while often willing, cannot always fill the void. Adult children balancing their own financial, professional, and familial obligations may provide support, but rarely enough to alleviate the deeper emotional consequences of isolation. For many seniors, this creates a paradox. The very support systems that were intended to safeguard them now highlight the gaps in autonomy, independence, and meaningful engagement. And yet, this crisis remains largely invisible in public discourse. Retirement is marketed as freedom and leisure, while loneliness is stigmatized or ignored. Policymakers focus on healthcare, pensions, and housing, but rarely on the emotional and social well-being of retirees. The silent epidemic continues, unacknowledged, even as its impact grows. Communities that were once vibrant and interconnected have fractured. Churches, civic organizations, and local clubs, once centers of social engagement, struggle with declining membership. Seniors find themselves adrift in a landscape where familiar anchors have vanished, leaving emotional and social instability in their wake. For some, loneliness leads to despair. Mental health issues intensify. The desire for independence clashes with the need for support. The emotional weight becomes as heavy as any mortgage, medical bill, or debt. Retirement, which should be a period of dignity and rest, is now a terrain of quiet suffering. The hidden crisis of retirement loneliness reveals a stark truth: financial security alone cannot guarantee well-being. Social, emotional, and community connections are essential components of a healthy, fulfilling retirement. When these are absent, the consequences ripple across families, communities, and even public health systems. As the chapter closes, one question lingers: how can a society promise dignity, rest, and security in retirement, when the very structures meant to support these ideals fail to address the human need for connection? In the next chapter, we confront the final piece of this story: the future of the American retirement dream, an examination of looming policy decisions, societal shifts, and the potential paths forward for a system in crisis. Next chapter, the future of the American retirement dream, exploring potential solutions, systemic reforms, and the hope that the American dream of retirement can be rebuilt amidst unprecedented challenges. The American retirement dream is at a crossroads. Decades of promises, labor, and planning have collided with systemic failure, market volatility, and social neglect. Yet, within the chaos, there lies a possibility, a path forward, if society, policy, and individuals can confront the uncomfortable truths that have been ignored for far too long. The challenges are enormous. Social security, once the bedrock of retirement stability, faces long-term funding pressures. Pension systems have eroded. Private retirement accounts, reliant on markets, are vulnerable to crashes and manipulation. Healthcare costs continue to rise, housing remains precarious, and debt shadows millions of retirees. The structural forces arrayed against the elderly are powerful, invisible, and relentless. Yet, history reminds us that systems are not immutable. Legislative reforms, social programs, and economic policies have the potential to reshape retirement into a more secure, dignified phase of life. Proposals for expanding Social Security, increasing access to affordable healthcare, regulating financial products, and strengthening housing support all exist. The question is not whether solutions are possible, but whether the political will and societal commitment can match the urgency of the crisis. Innovations are emerging as well. Community-driven initiatives, cooperative housing for seniors, nonprofit healthcare support, and financial literacy programs provide models for alternative approaches. These initiatives demonstrate that retirement security need not rely solely on individual savings or corporate promises. Collective action, education, and community engagement can bridge gaps, providing not just financial relief, but social and emotional support. Yet the path forward requires more than policy. It demands cultural reckoning, a willingness to confront uncomfortable truths about work, labor, and reward. Americans must grapple with the reality that decades of loyalty and effort have not always been met with fairness. Retirement, long marketed as a guaranteed reward, has become contingent on markets, luck, and systemic factors beyond individual control. Recognizing this is the first step toward meaningful reform. Consider the potential of employer-driven solutions. Companies that offer defined benefit pensions, supplemental retirement programs, or healthcare support create tangible security for workers. While the era of universal pensions may be over, targeted initiatives can restore trust and provide stability. Corporations, when accountable, can play a role not only in profitability, but in societal well-being. Financial literacy is equally critical. Educating Americans about the risks of 401(k)s, market volatility, hidden fees, and debt management empowers individuals to make informed decisions. Knowledge alone is not enough to overcome systemic forces, but it provides a crucial tool in navigating a complex landscape. Communities, nonprofits, and educational institutions can contribute to a culture where preparation is realistic, not idealized. Technology, too, offers hope. Digital platforms can provide real-time financial monitoring, predictive modeling for retirement planning, and personalized advice for managing healthcare, housing, and investments. These tools, if widely accessible and unbiased, could reduce vulnerability and provide clarity in a world of uncertainty. Yet, perhaps the most vital element is empathy. The retirement crisis is not abstract, it is lived, experienced, and human. Policies, programs, and tools are necessary, but they must be guided by recognition of the human toll, loneliness, anxiety, and the erosion of dignity. Rebuilding the retirement dream requires centering the lived experiences of those most affected, ensuring that solutions address not just financial metrics, but quality of life. Across America, innovators, policymakers, and ordinary citizens are experimenting with solutions. Intergenerational housing projects, community-based health cooperatives, and advocacy groups focused on seniors' rights demonstrate that alternative futures are possible. These efforts may not reverse decades of systemic neglect, but they illuminate a path forward, a way to reclaim dignity, security, and hope in the twilight years. The question, then, is whether society will act. Will the lessons of pension collapses, the vulnerabilities of the 401(k), the crushing weight of healthcare and debt, and the isolation of seniors prompt collective action? Or will retirement remain a fragmented, precarious phase, marked by uncertainty and insecurity for the majority, and opportunity for the few? For individuals, the path is equally complex. Retirement planning must account not only for savings and investment, but for healthcare, housing, debt, and social support. The old model, work, save, retire, is insufficient. Retirees must navigate a web of interdependent factors, balancing risk, timing, and resilience. Preparation is no longer a guarantee, but a nuanced, multifaceted strategy. And yet, hope persists. Despite decades of systemic failures, Americans continue to innovate, adapt, and fight for dignity in retirement. Families create networks of care. Communities provide support. Policymakers and advocates challenge inequities. These efforts remind us that the retirement dream, though fractured, is not entirely lost. It is a vision still worth striving for, even in the face of profound obstacles. As the sun sets on this exploration, one truth is undeniable: the American retirement dream is at a tipping point. It has been challenged, betrayed, and fractured. But it can be rebuilt, not as an abstract promise, but as a lived reality that combines financial security, social connection, and dignity. The question remains whether America will rise to meet this challenge, or allow another generation to confront retirement as a gamble, a burden, and a shadow of the promise once made. The future is uncertain. The stakes are immense. But within the challenge lies opportunity, the chance to reclaim what was lost, to honor the labor of generations, and to redefine retirement not as an abstract ideal, but as a tangible, achievable reality for all. And in that possibility, there is both warning and hope, a reminder that the dream of retirement is not inevitable, it must be actively preserved, nurtured, and defended, before it slips entirely beyond reach. After chapter, we will craft a cinematic, 1,000-word emotional outro, wrapping the entire documentary with reflection, suspense, and hope, leaving viewers thoughtful, moved, and inspired. The story of retirement in America is not a single narrative. It is a tapestry, woven from decades of labor, ambition, hope, and fear. It stretches across boardrooms and factory floors, urban streets and rural towns, living rooms and nursing homes. It is a story of dreams promised and dreams deferred, of security promised and security denied. We have seen the rise and fall of pensions, the gamble of the 401k, and the quiet hand of Wall Street shaping the lives of millions. We have walked through the corridors of debt that follow into old age, witnessed families stretched thin under the weight of care and cost, and felt the isolation that shadows those who should be resting. We have explored the crushing reality of healthcare, the fragility of homeownership, and the pervasive loneliness that accompanies financial insecurity. And yet, amid the shadows, we have also glimpsed resilience, ingenuity, and hope. Retirement is not merely a financial milestone, it is profoundly human. It is about dignity, autonomy, and the ability to live a life unburdened by constant worry. It is about community, connection, and the freedom to pursue curiosity, joy, and purpose. The failure of systems, markets, and policies to safeguard these ideals has real consequences: shattered plans, postponed dreams, and generations of Americans navigating uncertainty. But within this crisis lies opportunity. Understanding the failures is the first step toward meaningful change. Awareness allows families to plan, communities to organize, and policymakers to act. It empowers individuals to navigate risk more thoughtfully, to advocate for fairness, and to demand transparency from institutions that shape the trajectory of their lives. Hope emerges not from fantasy, but from action. Expanding social security, regulating financial products, controlling healthcare costs, supporting intergenerational housing, and fostering social connection are all tangible paths forward. Community programs, cooperative initiatives, and educational campaigns offer models that can restore dignity, reduce isolation, and protect financial security. Small interventions, when scaled, can become transformative. The American retirement dream, fractured though it may be, is not irretrievably lost. It can be rebuilt as a vision rooted in reality, one that acknowledges risk, addresses inequity, and honors the labor of generations. It requires vigilance, empathy, and commitment. It demands that society confront uncomfortable truths, while also investing in solutions that restore hope and security. And yet, even as we speak of solutions, the human stories remain at the heart of this narrative. The retirees quietly navigating debt, the families sacrificing to protect dignity, the communities forming networks of care, all of these reveal a resilience that cannot be measured in dollars or statistics alone. These are the faces, the lives, the truths that remind us why retirement matters, and why its failures cannot be ignored. The dream of retirement is fragile because it depends not only on systems, but on trust, the trust between citizens and institutions, between families, and within communities. When that trust is broken, the consequences ripple outward, emotionally, socially, and economically. Rebuilding it is not easy. It requires transparency, accountability, and a willingness to confront decades of systemic oversight. And so, as the sun sets on the story we have explored together, one truth remains clear: retirement is more than an economic calculation. It is a mirror reflecting the values, priorities, and empathy of a society. It is a measure not just of wealth, but of human dignity, connection, and care. And it is a test that every generation faces, as they consider what kind of future they wish to create for themselves and those who come after. The American retirement dream is at a tipping point, and the choices made today will resonate for decades. Will we continue to gamble with the futures of millions, leaving hope and security at the mercy of markets and policies? Or will we act decisively, reform systems, protect dignity, and nurture the social and financial structures necessary for a meaningful retirement? The answers will not come overnight. They will require persistence, courage, and collective vision. They will demand honesty about past failures and creativity in designing a more resilient future. And they will require that society see retirees not as statistics, but as humans, complex, deserving, and invaluable. As the camera pans over quiet neighborhoods, bustling cities, nursing homes, and living rooms, one is struck by the profound tension between what retirement promises and what it delivers. But even within this tension lies the possibility of change, the glimmer of hope that the dream can be recalibrated, not as a fantasy of effortless leisure, but as a lived reality of security, connection, and dignity. The story of American retirement is unfinished. It is a narrative still being written, with chapters yet to unfold in the lives of millions. And as we leave these stories behind, we carry with us a message both cautionary and inspiring, that retirement, like any human endeavor, is not guaranteed. It must be nurtured, defended, and actively pursued. Because in the end, the true measure of a society is how it treats those who have given their years, their labor, and their lives to its progress. And in that reflection lies the ultimate question, the final challenge, and the enduring hope: can the American retirement dream be reclaimed, not just as a promise, but as a reality worthy of those who have earned it? The answer, ultimately, rests with us all.